The garage lights were still on, but both McLaren cars were already out. 2 drivers, 2 separate failures, and not a single clear answer from the pit wall. On paper, it looked like a double retirement, a bad day, something teams move on from. But inside the data stream, inside the silence that followed, something far more serious began to take shape. Because when a team cannot explain why both cars fail, and worse, fail differently, the issue is no longer reliability, it's control. And in Formula One, control is everything. The numbers from Shanghai didn't just expose a weakness in McLaren's car, they exposed uncertainty inside the project itself. And as that uncertainty grew, so did something else. Pressure. The kind that doesn't come from rivals, but from within. It happened quickly. Too quickly for a team that arrived in Shanghai expecting stability. McLaren entered the Chinese Grand Prix weekend with momentum. A car that had shown consistent pace across varying conditions, and a driver lineup capable of converting that into points. The expectation wasn't dominance, but control, predictability. Instead, within minutes, that illusion collapsed. Neither car made it to the stage of the race where strategy even becomes relevant. No tire management phase, no undercut window, no long-run degradation analysis, just failure. But what made this moment so unusual wasn't simply that both cars retired. Formula One has seen that before. It was the nature of the failures themselves. They weren't identical. One car experienced a failure linked to the power unit behavior, a sudden loss of drivability that forced retirement. The other showed a completely different set of symptoms, suggesting an unrelated issue. 2 cars, 2 problems. That immediately removes the possibility of a single point failure, something like a shared component or a known weak part. Instead, it points towards something far more difficult to diagnose, a systemic issue. And this is where the situation begins to shift from technical to structural. Because when a team cannot isolate a problem quickly, the consequences go beyond the garage. The entire race weekend becomes compromised. Not just in results, but in understanding. McLaren lost more than points in China. They lost data. A full race distance represents roughly 300 kilometers of critical performance information. Tire behavior, energy deployment patterns, thermal management under pressure, all of it gone. And in a season where development cycles are measured in fractions of a second, losing that data is equivalent to losing time. Time that your rivals continue to gain. But even more important than the lost data was what came after. There was no immediate, clear explanation, no decisive statement, just uncertainty. And in Formula One, uncertainty doesn't stay contained. It spreads. Because if the engineers don't have answers, the drivers begin to ask questions, and once those questions start, they don't stop at the car, they move toward the project itself. From the outside, a retirement looks binary. You're either in the race, or you're not. But inside the telemetry, the story is never that simple. Even in failure, the data leaves traces, patterns that reveal what the car was doing before everything stopped. And in McLaren's case, those traces didn't align. Early lap analysis showed stable sector times, no immediate signs of catastrophic performance loss. The delta between McLaren and its closest competitors remained within 3 to 5 tenths of a second per lap, a gap consistent with their expected race pace. That's important, because it confirms that the car, at least initially, was operating within its performance window. Then something changed. Energy deployment irregularities began to appear, subtle at first, then more pronounced. The car's ability to maintain consistent power delivery through acceleration zones became unstable. In Formula One terms, that's not just a power issue, it's a synchronization issue. Modern F1 power units rely on precise coordination between internal combustion, electrical systems, and energy recovery. When that coordination breaks, the driver feels it immediately, not always as a sudden failure, but as inconsistency. And inconsistency is often more dangerous than outright loss, because it forces the driver to adapt corner by corner, breaking point by breaking point. Now consider this. The second McLaren car didn't show the same pattern. Its data suggested a different failure path entirely, one that didn't match the energy deployment irregularities of the first. That divergence matters, because it tells us the issue wasn't a single faulty component or a shared calibration error. It suggests multiple failure triggers within the same system architecture, and that leads to a difficult conclusion. McLaren wasn't dealing with a problem. They were dealing with uncertainty in how their systems interacted under race conditions. That's a much bigger issue, because you can fix a component, you can replace a part. But uncertainty in system integration, that requires investigation, time, and trust in your data. And right now, McLaren didn't have that. The numbers told a story, but not a clear one. And in Formula 1, unclear data is more dangerous than bad data, because bad data gives you direction. Unclear data leaves you guessing. To understand why this matters, you have to look at how McLaren built its car. In recent seasons, their philosophy has leaned toward maximizing aerodynamic load while maintaining a manageable drag level, a balance that allows strong cornering performance without sacrificing too much straight-line speed. It's a controlled approach, one that prioritizes stability, but that stability comes with complexity. High-load aerodynamic setups place greater demands on tire management, thermal control, and energy systems. Every component has to operate within tighter margins, and when those margins are exceeded, even slightly, the consequences can cascade. Now compare that to some of McLaren's direct competitors. Teams with lower drag concepts can afford slightly more flexibility in energy deployment and cooling because their baseline stress on the system is lower. McLaren's approach, by contrast, is more sensitive, more precise, and therefore more vulnerable when something falls out of alignment. This is where China becomes significant, because what we saw wasn't just a failure, it was a breakdown in the system that supports that philosophy. And that raises a deeper question. Is the design pushing the limits too far for reliability at this stage of the season? Or is the issue not the concept, but the execution? Post-race comments didn't provide a clear answer, and that silence matters. Because in Formula 1, when a team is confident in its direction, it explains the problem quickly, even if the fix takes time. When the explanation is unclear, it usually means one of two things. They don't fully understand the issue yet, or they're not ready to reveal it. Either way, the effect is the same. Doubt. And doubt doesn't stay technical, it becomes psychological. Because the drivers aren't just racing the car, they're trusting it. And when that trust is interrupted, even once, it changes how they approach every lap that follows. For a driver, a retirement is frustrating, but a retirement without explanation is something else entirely, because it removes control, and control is what drivers rely on to perform at the limit. For Oscar Piastri, the situation is particularly complex. He's not just another driver in the lineup, he's a cornerstone of McLaren's future, a driver who has already demonstrated the ability to operate at a high level under pressure. But early season setbacks change perception. First, there was Australia, an incident that prevented him from even starting his home race, a moment that introduced doubt, even if it wasn't entirely within his control. Then China, not just another failure, but a compounded one. 2 races, 2 disruptions, and no clear resolution. From the outside, it's easy to frame this as bad luck. From inside the cockpit, it feels different, because each failure raises the same question. Can I rely on this car when it matters? And once that question exists, it doesn't go away. It follows the driver into every braking zone, every acceleration phase. It changes decision-making, even if only by a fraction. And in Formula 1, fractions define outcomes. Now add another layer to this. Piastri isn't navigating this situation alone. Behind him is Mark Webber, someone who understands the internal dynamics of Formula 1 teams, someone who has experienced both success and frustration within complex structures. That matters, because this isn't just about emotional reaction, it's about strategic awareness. Webber knows how quickly a project can shift from stable to uncertain, and more importantly, he knows when to start asking difficult questions, not publicly, but internally. And once those questions begin, they carry weight, because they're not just about one race, they're about the direction of the entire project.